I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Picture yourself being part of a broken marriage that's lasted most of your lifetime. Not an abusive one, but the kind where the first few years that you spent together were full of wonder and excitement. But as time marched on, you fell out of love and started to sleep in separate beds. And it was all downhill from there. Aside from an occasional argument though, the marriage is still amicable, and sometimes it can even be comforting. So you stick together even if it's ultimately loveless, frustrating, routine, and unfulfilling. Do you get where I'm going with this yet? I have a very long and complicated relationship with this franchise, so when Dragon Ball Z Kakarot was announced, I felt three things. The mildest pang of nostalgia, a hefty dose of skepticism, and I suppose most immediately, an inexplicable desire to come back and try to make videos again. A semi-open world action RPG covering all of Dragon Ball Z from Raditz's arrival on Earth up until the end of the Buu saga sounded like an ambitious project, and for the most part that's what Kakarot turns out to be. However, with ambition often comes sacrifice. So let's all sacrifice a few minutes of our day. I figure this shouldn't take more than like 5 or 10 minutes, but oh fuck my life. Number 1, the greatest story ever told isn't Dragon Ball Z, but here it is anyway. Again. Before I start this video, I'd like to preface this by talking about the importance of subjectivity. Ready? I'll go get my stopwatch. It's important because not every person is going to have the same life experiences, preferences, and values, so depending on what those are, it's going to affect their opinion on a piece of media. There. It sure would have been funny if I spent an hour trying to explain this before the review even started. What I'm trying to say here is that I wasn't exactly thrilled to play Dragon Ball Z's storyline again. I've been doing the same song and dance for 20 years now, so it took a lot of willpower to not just skip a lot of these cutscenes and then go back to doing side quests. So you know my bias now, and if that's too much for you to accept and you want me to lie and say that I cried nostalgic tears over this game so that you can feel validated as a hardcore fan, well, I'm sure you've already bought your $120 collector's edition, and I think you have a pretty good idea of what I'm going to tell you to do with that pillar. Nothing, because you can't even use it until spring. Kakarot takes on the unenviable task of trying to adapt and condense over 200 episodes worth of anime into one game, and it does a pretty good job of it. This was especially true during the earlier segments when it's interwoven with some of the new story elements and exploration. It's a welcome addition to see Kakarot include some of the more character-centric moments that aren't touched on in most other Dragon Ball Z games, like Goku with Gohan, Chi-Chi being just slightly retconned into being more supportive, and even one of the Buu Saga's strongest moments for me, with Goten meeting his father for the first time. Although if I'm being honest, it wasn't exactly done very well here, which kinda leads to one of the problems with the way the story was handled. Unfortunately, there are a lot of key moments that are brushed over with either narrated stills or an offhand comment.
そういえば、ドクターゲロ。
あいつなら死んだ。今さっきな。
Oh, did you want to maybe show it? Kind of an important scene. Most of the omitted or changed scenes are seemingly an attempt to tone down the violence, which is a brilliant idea when you're adapting a series that centers largely around death and violence. I understand that nothing exists in a vacuum, and the days of brutal Dragon Ball Z have long since passed. But this still rubs me the wrong way, because if I'm nostalgic for any version of this show, it's the uncensored original. Back in the early 2000s when I was a dumb child on the internet, I learned how butchered the show was for American audiences, and it really jump-started me into thinking critically about media. So I indirectly owe a lot to this series. I can deal with it being less violent, but when Mori getting his neck broken is changed to him just quickly getting punched, it doesn't come remotely close to the same impact. Hell, if you weren't familiar with the story already, you may not even realize he was killed here. It's not just because of the violence, but more so the pacing. While Mori's death lasted about 3 seconds in this game, it was built up in the anime over almost a full minute, and it lingered on the aftermath way longer. It's one of those times where Dragon Ball Z's slow pace absolutely works in its own favor. So do I expect them to pace everything the same way as it was in the show? Fuck no, because the game would end up being like 400 hours long. Unfortunately, it really puts the onus on the player to know this story beforehand, when they have to fill in all these blanks themselves. I just don't know how much a newcomer is gonna get out of this game. Oh, and while we're still kind of on the topic of horrific scenes in the Frieza saga, let's not forget about Cargo, because Kakarot did. They don't even show him at all. I guess because they got cold feet about depicting a child being killed in a video game? Oh, never mind. Oh well. At least they managed to keep Dende's height consistent throughout the Buu saga in this game. It's cool that they use this opportunity to fix an inconsistency in the original work, all the way up to the end cutscene where it shows everybody on the tower. Oh, never mind. Aside from small issues like these, some of the more boring scenes dragging out way too long, and some truly baffling decisions on what to include and what not to, it's I guess a reasonably faithful adaptation? My voice got higher pitched there, so you know that's a good sign. I guess it just speaks to a bigger problem when trying to adapt Dragon Ball Z into an RPG. The story is so rigid in its structure that even one change, like letting Goku survive the fight against Raditz, would drastically change everything that came afterwards. So for better or for worse, they had to stick to canon, but doing so turns Kakarot into an endless slog of battles that you're expected to win, only to have the cutscenes tell you that you lost. Needless to say, it got old very fast, and it made it very difficult for me to stay engaged. At the end of the day, narrative is just a framework to build the rest of your game on, so let's see how well it holds up in some other areas, shall we? Number 2. It's Dragon Ball Z like you've never seen it before. Yeah, sure haven't heard that one yet. From the name of this section, you may think that I'm just gonna be a sarcastic dickhead throughout the whole thing, which is usually my default, but I have to give credit where credit is due. When Kakarot wants to look good, it looks good. Sometimes downright amazing. I have praised CyberConnect 2 on multiple occasions for their work on the Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm games, for the animation at least. Now, I'm not much of a Naruto fan, considering I haven't seen or read any of it since 2006, so I don't really know what a Madara is or why there's a new show with Naruto's son Bart, but I have enjoyed some of these games on their own merits, or at least watching YouTube videos for the ultimate moves and team attacks. There's just so much energy and creativity in how it's all presented, and while I don't think Kakarot quite reaches those heights, it does come very close at times. When a cutscene that plays during the Buu saga can leave me impressed, that's when you know you've got a top-notch art team, animators, and direction. Unfortunately, this only makes up about 5% of the game, and the rest kinda looks, yeah. To be fair, I did fully expect that not everything in the game would look as good as the best scenes, but instead of just staying in-engine for the less extravagant ones, they make the puzzling decision to use pre-rendered scenes that end up just looking really subpar, and frankly worse than it normally does during gameplay. The fact that it's pre-rendered at 30 FPS when the game runs at 60 on PC makes the final product a jarring experience. Unfortunately, this also happens during combat as well. Several attacks or in-battle events put the frame rate down to 30, which can interrupt the flow somewhat. I didn't like it when Mortal Kombat did it, and I don't like it here either, so cut that shit out. Then there were the weird moments and cutscenes that stuck out to me as just completely unfinished, like Gohan going into this creepy, unblinking quasi-T pose. He did it again much later in the game too, so I have to assume this was a bug, because there were sure a few of those. Like I mentioned before, they abridge certain scenes by giving a brief synopsis of events with stills at times, which I really don't mind all that much because I find it just to be efficient. What makes less sense to me is the way the entire final cutscene looks. I mean, just look at this. I realize that not every scene is going to be as extravagant as the best ones, also known as the trailer shots, but if you're not going to animate it well, just leave it be as stills. Now I'm going to have this creepy shot of Chi-Chi's unblinking face haunt my nightmares for the rest of my life. So that's 2 months I'm gonna have trouble sleeping now. I was initially a bit too harsh with this game's graphics while I was reviewing it, mostly because of small details like the wolves looking wrong, because I definitely have the right to criticize art when I can barely draw Puar. So I decided to give Xenoverse 2 a try to see if I was justified in my criticism, and whew. That game was only released 4 years ago now, and comparing it to Kakarot is like night and day if we're talking graphics and presentation alone. Go back even further, like Budokai Tenkaichi 3's intro, you know, the pre-rendered one that's supposed to look better than the game, and you'll see just how easy it is to take for granted how much these games have improved in terms of graphical fidelity, and more importantly in their art direction. Kakarot never has that wonky off-model look that some of these games, and even the anime, often depicted, and I have to stress just how much effort must have gone into making this game look as good as it does, sometimes. Graphics can only carry a game so far though. So is Kakarot any good? Number 3. The battle system. Yeah, I couldn't even come up with a good title for this one, because the battle system is barely worth talking about. Kakarot has what I would call serviceable combat. It controls well enough and there's a satisfying punch to it when you land a good finisher, but it boils down to playing like a watered down Xenoverse, which wasn't all that complex to begin with. You have all the series mainstays like a dash, a ki blast, block, and super moves, but your melee is down to just one button now. You can end your melee combo with a knockback or a slightly more powerful ki blast, or you can waste most of your ki to do a vanishing attack that doesn't help that much. The combat is so simplistic that most battles play out the same way more often than not. Basic ki blasts are weak and inaccurate, while super moves such as the Kamehameha and especially the Big Bang attack are just devastating. It doesn't take very long to recharge your ki again, so it's very easy to fall into the trap of simply spamming your way through most battles, mostly because it's very efficient, and you're almost never punished for doing so. When enemies start using super armor and can interrupt your combos seemingly on a whim, it can become frustrating, even more so when you're pitted against multiple foes at once. You can never be sure if a move is going to connect or if somebody out of your line of sight is going to shoot a ki blast at you to interrupt it. This was the point where I decided to fight fire with fire, and I started to play dirty by taking advantage of the stun mechanic. Certain attacks, like the incredibly cost-effective body smash, inflict a lot of stun damage and are easy to land. Not only can it temporarily leave your enemy dazed, but it damages their stun gauge. When that breaks, you can use more powerful, unblockable versions of your super attacks on them repeatedly, all while they're utterly defenseless. The stun trick unfortunately did become obsolete the further I got into the game, but not in a way that made the combat more engaging, but we'll get there. When all is said and done, this is an RPG, and I'm willing to deal with a less than stellar battle system if the other elements help elevate it. Kakarot is full of so many contradictions when it comes to this that it's been hard for me to wrap my head around what I even think about it overall. I'm gonna give it my best shot, but first, a word from our sponsor.
We now return to the Mr. Joy Show.
Number 4. Dragon Sound. One of the things that got me interested in Kakarot in the first place was the decision to include the Shunsuke Kikuchi score. When so many anime games are missing their iconic music due to licensing, this was a very welcome feature and added a layer of authenticity to the game. While Kakarot does use new renditions rather than the original, I enjoyed hearing Son Gohan and Demon King Piccolo, We Got a Powers instrumental version, and the Fearsome Ginyu Force, just to name a few. Coupled with the opening cutscene being the original Chala Head Chala, and it's pretty much everything a fan of the original series would have wanted. So how many songs do we get anyway? Oh. I'll be honest, I didn't expect them to include the entire score, but having such a small amount of it available with other unspecified songs locked away as DLC that also won't be available until spring, well, that just left a bad taste in my mouth. How are these additional songs even going to be implemented? What, are we supposed to play through the game again just so we can hear Day of Fate play during the fight against Cell or something? Nah, I think I'm good. I understand that licensing music can get expensive, but that gives me the impression that Bandai and Toei just didn't want to shoulder that burden themselves. So instead, the fans are paying for it. Wow, what a scam. I mean, honor. Also, is there a reason why the Vegeta trailer had that song We Were Angels, you know, the Boo Saga's ending theme, but the game didn't? Fuck it, I could complain about this all day, but you get the point. The other new songs serve their purpose. They're not bad, but they don't exactly gel with Kikuchi's style, sounding more like run-of-the-mill RPG songs than a classic Dragon Ball piece. And if I'm complaining about only getting a few of these songs, I can only imagine what fans of the Falconer score must feel like. Now, because I'm me, I went with the Japanese voiceovers, which was bittersweet for many reasons. Chief among them being the passing of Hiromi Tsuru and the continued medical leave of Joji Inami. Their presence was sorely missed, and it certainly took a lot of the punch out of the game for me. But that's just how life is sometimes. A never-ending stream of death and sadness. The rest of the cast is fine, although some of them sound like they're showing their age. The thing is, they've been doing this for longer than I've been alive, and considering how my voice sounds, I don't think I'm in any position to judge them. I should take this opportunity to say that I don't have a problem with the English cast, and it's kind of a miracle when you consider how far Funimation's actors have come since the days of
This can't be.
But when Kakarot was clearly made to channel the Japanese original's nostalgia, well, I just had to go with this version. Not that I don't have my own issues with the Japanese cast, but I'll get to that another time. What I will say now is that Kakarot has solidified just how much I've grown to dislike the use of partial voice acting in video games. You know, the choice to have characters say a single word or phrase that doesn't match the text that's showing up. Even better are times when they don't even use words, and they just make noises like these. If you're not going to voice act every line, that's okay, but we don't need this to keep our attention. Don't worry though, it gets worse. While you're exploring the open world, you'll collect items by flying over them, such as cooking ingredients or machine parts. It's nice that you don't have to pick them up manually, so that's pretty great. What's not pretty great is that whenever you do, your character will comment on nearly every item you pick up, and sometimes it's very specific. As in, if you get a good apple, you can be sure that they'll tell you how good that apple looks. It wouldn't be so bad if it was a very low chance of having this dialogue happen, but it just never stops. So if you're planning on gathering some materials, grinding out a few random battles, or just exploring, do yourself a favor and turn that voice volume down, or off entirely. Aside from a few nitpicks and minor issues, it may seem puzzling that I called this game a beautiful mess in the title, but we're going to get to that right now. Number 5. A half-baked Kakarot cake. Kakarot's greatest contradiction is that it's an RPG in the first place, with multiple progression systems, a skill tree, side quests, cooking, gathering, fishing, time attacks, baseball, the list goes on. It seems like there's so much to do in this game, and on paper there is. Once you get familiar with the game and how it works though, a lot of these activities just seem half-baked or pointless. Take dinosaur hunting for example. It sounds like it would be fun, and it harkens back to Gohan's early survival training. What it actually amounts to is shooting fish in a barrel. The dinosaurs can't harm you, nor can they reach you while you're in the air, so just keep shooting until they fall over when you're in zero danger yourself. How exciting. I should mention something positive here, because not every idea is bad. Case in point, the community board. As you go through the game, you'll unlock soul emblems, which are basically collectible character cards that you can slot into several boards. These net you passive bonuses depending on who you put where, and each character's soul emblem can be further strengthened with items. To be honest, I think the community board is easily the best system in the game, because it has some thought put into it and plays to Kakarot's strengths. It encourages you to go out into the open world, do your side quests, and collect more character emblems. Doing all of this helps you immerse yourself more in the world. Unfortunately, now I have to talk about the skill tree, or as I like to call it. In order to gain a skill or level 1 up using the skill tree, you have to collect Z-orbs. These orbs are located all around the world and can be picked up by flying over them. Now you may be thinking that this is a blatant attempt to pad the game's runtime, and normally you'd be correct. For whatever reason though, the skill tree is mostly gated by your progress in the main story, so you're almost never going to be in a position when you actually need to go out and get orbs actively. I guess this was to prevent you from learning moves that you shouldn't have ahead of time, but the game clearly doesn't care about continuity if I kick Frieza's ass as 5-year-old Gohan. If the cutscene is going to disregard everything that happened anyway, why not just let the player have some fun? Once you level up enough, you can fly through weaker enemies to instantly kill them. With how fast they respawn, you can do this repeatedly with minimal downtime, and ironically it becomes a much better way of learning how to accurately fly than orb collecting, all while giving you more orbs for far less work, and giving you full XP and item drops. Even without doing this all that often, you'll have far more orbs than you know what to do with. I ended the game with literally hundreds of thousands of these things, and nothing to spend them on. So why even have them or the skill tree at all? Because it was thrown in without any thought or care? Oh, yeah, I think it was that. The subpar combat is made infinitely worse by a severe lack of enemy variety. When I first saw the Skull Robot was a random enemy type, I was initially happy when I saw it. Naive and hopeful as I was, I said, "Hey, that's from the original Dragon Ball. I wonder what else they put in this game." And then I saw it again. And again. And again. And again. In addition to the Skull Robots, there are eventually Cybermen, Frieza Soldiers, another kind of robot, and Babidi Soldiers. And I think that's it. Oh, and they pretty much all fight the same way. It's a real shame because there are so many designs and creatures that they could have used to help make encounters more exciting, and to add to the fan service. Compare this to Toriyama's designs for Dragon Quest, and it feels like the setting and his art are such a waste in this game. Even during side quests, you'll find characters like poachers or bandits trying to threaten you, and you think for a split second that you're going to be able to beat up some people for a change. And then they send out the Skull Robots, and you strap yourself in for disappointment. It was at this point where my expectations just plummeted, because the game's limitations became abundantly clear. But Mr. Joy, of course you couldn't fight a normal human being because the fight would be over in an instant and it wouldn't be a challenge at all. Well, guess what? That's pretty much what happens with almost every fight anyway when you discover cooking. The food items you can make are powerful as is, giving you very strong temporary buffs and permanent stat increases, but they're even more so when you get Chi-Chi to combine them into full courses. There's nothing quite like having Vegeta going to another man's home and telling his wife to prepare dinner for him. I guess that means you could say that Vegeta is really into cuckolding. The community board I mentioned earlier can further enhance a food's effect, causing them to be even more powerful. And if that's not enough, your stats will also be boosted from the board by a percentage. All of this synergizes in a way to make your character's power spiral way out of control, to the point where some lower level enemies will start doing 1 damage to you per hit. When you have literally millions of HP, you would have to leave the game running for several hours, if not days, before they'd finally be able to kill you. This turns Kakarot into a complete numbers game where playing well doesn't really matter. You're still given an S rank more often than not, even if you just spam Big Bang Attack and nothing else. I guess in a way, Kakarot captures the Dragon Ball Z experience of hopeless power gaps, but it doesn't make for a very engaging video game, does it? It just tells me that this game wasn't balanced at all, or it was balanced around the assumption that people would only play the main story. As stupid as that sounds for an open world RPG, this is reinforced by how much XP certain story battles give, and how often you're given free level ups. Some may say that that's a good thing as it eliminates the need to grind, but that just leads to another mechanic that they didn't plan out but shoved in anyway. Instead of just learning a move when it should become available in the story, or, making use of that skill tree that they inexplicably have, you're required to do training battles, which require D medals. These medals are scattered throughout the world, and you'll also get them from doing side quests and progressing through the story. So make sure you have enough medals, go to the designated training areas on the map, and then fight your inner demons to learn a move. This does nothing but break the flow of the game, and it ruins any immersion when bosses will just wait for you to go learn your moves when you're in the middle of the story. Sometimes, like in the case of Piccolo's Hellzone grenade, which he canonically uses during the 17 fight, you'll actually be below the required level to learn it when you're at that point in the story. I had to be level 55 in order to use the move, but I was only level 46 when I fought him. I say only, but I'm sure that I was higher level than the game wanted me to be, because the fight was a total joke where I basically just mashed the melee button the whole way through. And before anybody comments saying that I'm technically wrong about this because it only recommends that you be level 55, Hellzone Grenade first requires you to learn Ultimate Explosive Wave 2 and 3, which are unlocked at level 48 and 55 respectively. Are you starting to see what I mean when I said this game was a fucking mess? To help illustrate my point, let's take a look at the entire fight between Gohan and the fat Majin Buu, shall we? This is a fight where Gohan is supposed to be weaker than he was during the Cell Saga, and one where Gohan is supposed to be overwhelmed completely. Ready? Let's go.
無敵なのか攻撃がまるで通じてない攻撃がまるで通じてない
What makes this even more infuriating is that once you reach the post-game, random enemies will start to scale to your level. It doesn't make them difficult, but it begs the question, why didn't bosses do this during the story? I'm not asking Kakarot to be Sekiro or something, but a little bit of challenge and balance would have been nice. You may be saying that it's my fault for grinding too much, or for spending too much time eating during the intermissions. My stats wouldn't be this high if I just played the game normally, right? Here's the thing, and I'm going to say this as nicely as I can. It should never be on the player to go out of their way to avoid using a game's mechanics and systems to get the intended experience. So you'll have to excuse me for not accepting a broken, unbalanced mess of a game like a true fan should. Which brings me to number 6, Bansho Fanservice, because I need to put out the fire I just made. I've noticed a lot of reviewers have called Kakarot a love letter to fans, but I would say it's more like a second-hand Hallmark card that somebody bought from a thrift store. It's undeniably kinda cheap, it still has somebody else's names written on it in pen, and it carries the lingering smell of formaldehyde, death, and sorrow. Because you know that whoever donated it to the thrift store just lost a loved one who was probably very elderly, probably riddled with dementia, and begging to have the plug pulled on them. But regardless of all of that, their hearts were in the right place, and it's a nice card all the same. Whether all those flaws that I talked about earlier were due to a lack of budget, a tight deadline, or probably both, I can only speculate. What is very clear to me though is that a lot of love and care was put into this game, and I don't want to give the impression that I'm personally angry at anybody who made it, except for maybe Yoko Ono. Not the one who worked on the localization for this game, but the one who sounds like a real-life Baba. There were plenty of times where Kakarot managed to put a smile on my face. There's something about this setting that just feels like a warm blanket to me, with those vibrant colors and the strange architecture, not to mention all the familiar locations and characters. It was great running into Nam, Hachan, Puar, Oolong, Launch, Bora and Upa, Baba assuming I had the volume muted, and so on. While many of these encounters were little more than fetch quests or a simple fight, sometimes they went the extra mile and gave us some characterization, and not the horribly embarrassing kind either. It was cool to get a bit more information on where exactly the mind training that Gohan and Krillin did came from, while also making it comedic. It served to remind longtime fans that deep down, even if he doesn't show it outright, Krillin is still the same pervert he was in the original Dragon Ball. The Pilaf gang shows up at multiple times and locations, often just making a cameo, but they have their own fair share of side quests too, one of which even features the Pilaf robot. Ha, finally a side quest with a unique boss. Oh. Now that I think about it, there's a surprisingly large amount of Puar and Yamcha side quests. While the game never overtly states this, I'm just throwing it out there. It's pretty obvious who Yamcha was cheating on Bulma with.
Cat loves yeah.
You may think that it's weird, and it kinda is, but like, I don't know, if you had a shapeshifter friend who can stay in whatever form they wanted to indefinitely, and respects you enough to literally call you Yamcha-sama, well, come on. And hey, this part in Super kinda confirms it anyway, so don't blame me for this shit. And then there was the part when Baba flat out told Gohan that his life was going to be shit from here on out. I really appreciate how blunt she was, and I guess as a fortune teller, well, she knew exactly where this was all going. It's also implied that it was Baba who gave Goku the idea to stay dead at the end of the Cell Saga. She pretty much tells him to go kill himself if he wants to fight stronger foes, so, you know, I thought that was pretty funny. And what do you know, my predictions about Piccolo not eating during the full course meals turned out to be right. Even if there is a side quest on Namek that confirms that Namekians can eat if water isn't an option, it's safe to say that the side quests were where I had the most fun with this game, because I didn't know exactly what was going to happen ahead of time. Notice how all of these examples that I gave were small character-based additions to the world, not large and pointless ones that only raise a million more questions. This actually worried me a little when I saw one of the promotional trailers, which claims that the game was going to answer
burning questions to the Dragon Ball Z lore.
A lot of the time, expanding and over-explaining details or backstories in a piece of fiction just has the potential to ruin things. An example of Dragon Ball falling into this kind of trap is with shit like Dragon Ball Minus. Ugh. Thankfully, there was nothing nearly as awful that was added to Kakarot. But one particular quest stood out to me when they tried to explain the reason why animal people stopped showing up after a certain point in Z. According to Kakarot, there was a fad where people would take body-modifying drugs in order to become beastmen. The fad passed, and due to not taking the drugs, they turned back into normal human beings again. Oh. Well, that's lame. The game takes this a step further and claims that even King took these drugs and was originally a normal guy. If I've learned anything from being on the internet as long as I have, it's that if such a drug were to exist, a good number of people would never stop taking it, no matter what. I also learned that during episode 173, when the king is addressing the world on TV about Cell, you can see the portraits of Earth's former rulers on the wall, and they're all dog people. And how about episode 16, when Gohan runs into the gang of orphans? Are you saying these two kids were taking drugs?
Actually, that was filler not sanctioned by Toriyama-sensei. Your argument is thus factually unsound.
Oh. So in that case, I guess nothing in this game is canon. To be fair, this same quest also says that Puar and Oolong were just born the way they were, which implies that they weren't all products of this drug. You see animal people running around all over the place even in the Buu saga in this game, and perhaps most importantly, you get the quest from Karin to begin with. You know, the 800-year-old cat deity who lives on a gigantic tower just below God, who happens to be a green alien. Before I thought more about all of this, I was going to originally write a big spiel about how this explanation of talking animals being a drug phase kinda kills the magic of Dragon Ball. But the more I think about it, this quest just seems like a big elaborate meta joke. Background details don't need an explanation, and trying to do so in a Toriyama setting where the man gleefully forgets and ignores his own work is a joke in and of itself. Kakarot often makes an effort to try and combat some of that forgetfulness, but I just can't tell whether something like Dende shrinking at the very end of the game was a jab at Toriyama, or just a mistake they made themselves. After all, just like Toriyama, they're only human. Either way, this game does a lot more good than bad when it comes to fan service, and there's a wealth of information to be found that covers all kinds of events, even from the original Dragon Ball. If you're going to play with the Japanese voiceovers like I did, I would say that it helps to understand the language, because certain things are just not translatable. While I only know a very, very small amount of Japanese, I initially started to learn it way back in the day because of, well, this series. There's just something kind of magical how 20 years later, I now understand enough of the language to know that the Elder Kai isn't being offered a kiss here. Number 7. It's done. I've gone back and forth as to whether or not I would recommend Kakarot so many times while playing through it, while writing the review, and throughout the editing process. Now that it's all done though, I guess I have to put my foot down, don't I? There's a certain amount of charm that carries the game thanks to its setting, sound assets, iconic imagery, and all the fan service. But it comes down to being just another game in a long line of licensed anime products. It's not a terrible game by any stretch, but it doesn't really offer much if you're not already a fan, and if you're an exhausted, old, cynical, bitter and jaded fan like I am, you may find that so much familiar imagery doesn't rekindle your nostalgia so much as breed contempt. I don't need every game to have insane production values, or to be as tightly crafted as Sekiro or DMC5, but I don't think it's very unfair to say that Kakarot is underwhelming for a game released in 2020, and based on a money-printing juggernaut like Dragon Ball Z. It's a weird situation where anime games like these are often reviewed far less critically, and many publications almost dismissively give them a pass as something fans will love, as if they're not real games or something. I've said before that a game's theming can often make up for lackluster gameplay, and it's a reason why, while I enjoy The Outer Worlds quite a bit, it'll never replace New Vegas for me. So I can understand why people would enjoy Kakarot despite its flaws, but you just know that if this were an original IP, it would be much, much more harshly criticized. With a few updates and patches, or God forbid a sequel, these flaws can be minimized or ironed out. There's an update planned that will add a time machine, which will let you go back and complete whatever side quests you may have missed. And more free extra content is coming in addition to the paid DLC. If I'm being honest though, I don't think I'm going to bother putting any money or time into Kakarot anymore, because I've had more than enough of it, and maybe Dragon Ball in general for a little while. With future Dragon Ball Z games and inevitability, I'm open to giving them a try, but I'm not terribly hyped anymore. There's only so many times I can play through this story without any significant changes or new ideas being presented. And as much as I would adore a game that covered the original Dragon Ball in its entirety, with a stylized look that captures the 80s Toriyama style, and a much more grounded and impactful combat system, I'm really not gonna get my hopes up. I'm fully aware of how much less popular the original is, and if they were to try to adapt it nowadays, I fear that they would change too many things to try and keep it in line with modern standards. So, you know, no middle fingers or puff puff. I feel incredibly dirty for saying this, but I'm at the point where I would even prefer a Dragon Ball Super game over yet another foray into Z. I may not like it, and some aspects of it I utterly despise, but at least it's something different. And when everything becomes loveless, frustrating, routine, and unfulfilling, you sometimes take a risk on something that you know isn't good for you. That's where I stand in my broken marriage, a part of the Dragon Ball fandom that I can't seem to leave. Hey, I'm kinda back again. This took way longer than it should have, but I ended up having to relearn voiceovers and editing after not doing it for several years again. So that was a thing. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can see updates on what I'm currently working on. If you're not subscribed already, you can do that too if you like. This is where I'd plug a Patreon or Ko-fi, but I don't think I'm gonna do that until I get at least another episode or two done in a decent time frame. Things are better now though, so thanks for watching, even though I have a cold right now, so that's fun. Hope to see everybody again sooner rather than later.